When Augustus founded the empire, he established a system centered on the rule of one man. Appian states that Augustus sought to establish, quote, a family dynasty to succeed him and to enjoy a power similar to his own, despite Augustus himself claiming to have restored the republic. Unfortunately, he ran into a small problem: a lack of living male heirs. Blood became the essential qualification of dynastic succession, making the women of the early Roman Empire into literal kingmakers. These women were tasked with transmitting the blood of Augustus to future heirs and successors. The emperors of this period, the Julio Claudian emperors, are all related in some way to Livia, a Claudian, or Augustus, a Julian. In this period, imperial adoptions and arranged marriages became the standard between members of the imperial family or the powerful leading figures. With that came quite a bit of intermarriage between family members. As a result, the Julio Claudian family tree is infamously complex. The women of this Julio Claudian dynasty, despite having no legitimate power, were the kingmakers of the early empire. While they couldn't make direct laws, they were extremely influential when it came to pulling the strings behind the scenes. So today, let's explore their fascinating history. Today's video was brought to you by the patrons. It's through community support and episode suggestions that we're able to cover more niche and overlooked topics such as this one. You can provide your own feedback, participate in polls, and get HD downloads of all our art by joining today. In addition, we provide previews for new upcoming content. One of the most exciting projects we have in the works is the new True Size series, which will use Unreal Engine 5 to bring history to life like never before. Our first episode will be a look at the true size of a Roman imperial legion, from its organizational complexities, to its length on the march, and its fearsomeness when arrayed for battle. We've got a lot more in store, so head on over to our Patreon to learn more about the future of Invicta and help support the channel and shape our destiny. Before we delve any further, it's important to discuss the ancient sources from this period, especially when it comes to the treatment of women. This is especially the case when it comes to learning about the lives of imperial women, who were treated as reflections of the emperor, and not necessarily as a comment on themselves. The histories, which were written centuries after the fact, need to be taken with a grain of salt as a result. The first empress of Rome, Livia Drusilla, was the wife of Augustus. She is among the most prominent and influential women in Roman history, serving as a powerful confidant and advisor to the emperor. Livia came from an aristocratic family and was an immensely capable political figure in her own right. She was the right hand of Augustus, closely advising him throughout their long life together, and ensured the success of both his reign and his political policies. Livia was the third wife of Augustus. According to legend, when they were first introduced in 39 BC, they immediately fell deeply in love with each other. She already had one son and was pregnant with her second at the time, but for the most powerful man in Rome, this was merely a minor inconvenience. Each of them promptly divorced their current spouses and were married within a few short months. Although the couple did not have any children of their own, Augustus remained with Livia for the rest of his life. Together, they served as a powerful unit, with Livia as a potent force behind the scenes. Publicly, Livia was a respected Roman woman who upheld traditional values. Privately, though, she judiciously exercised her considerable power. Because of her ambitions, Livia is characterized as a wicked stepmother who is controlling and power-hungry. One rumor even accused her of poisoning and killing her husband. The claim, like many others, has been dismissed. It's far more likely that Augustus simply died of natural causes at the age of 75. When Augustus died, Livia was adopted into his familial clan, where she took on the new name Julia Augusta. Her adoption ensured that she would continue to maintain her influence and status within the dynasty, as well as securing the succession of her son Tiberius. When Tiberius succeeded Augustus as the new emperor, relations between himself and his mother were cordial for at least some time. Eventually, though, Tiberius grew jealous of his mother's influence and prominence in imperial affairs, especially at the assumption that he only got the throne because of his mother. When he retired to the island of Capri, it was partly to escape her influence. Livia lived to be 86 years old, and though she received a modest funeral and was buried with her husband inside the mausoleum, Tiberius refused to grant her the divine honors that Augustus had been given. It wouldn't be until 42 CE that her grandson, the Emperor Claudius, deified her as the Divia Augusta. Livia was the most prominent and influential woman of the Julio Claudian dynasty, having been married to the first emperor and been mother to another. Indeed, All the Julio Claudian emperors were her direct descendants. Her son Tiberius would succeed Augustus, Caligula, her great-grandson, would succeed Tiberius, and Claudius, her grandson, who would later deify her, was next, and finally came Nero, her great-great-grandson. Livia can best be summarized by this obituary, written by Tacitus. Quote, "An imperious mother, she was an accommodating wife and an excellent match for the subtleties of her husband and the insincerity of her son." Augustus's daughter from his second marriage was Julia the Elder. As the only child and direct descendant of Augustus, Julia was the guarantor of the Augustan line and was expected to hold herself accordingly. Julia's second marriage to Marcus Vespasianus Agrippa produced 5 children: Gaius Caesar, Lucius Caesar, Agrippa Postumus, Julia the Younger, and Agrippina the Elder, who would later play an active role in the dynasty. When Agrippa died, Augustus arranged for Julia to marry her stepbrother Tiberius in a political and dynastic move that neither side was particularly interested in. Originally, her 2 oldest sons, Gaius and Lucius, were designated as the heirs to Augustus's throne. To publicize this connection, coins were even minted with Julia's portrait between her 2 sons, highlighting her role as the connection between 2 generations of important men. Unsurprisingly though, the marriage between Tiberius and Julia was not a happy one. They split in 6 AD, with Tiberius exiling himself to the island of Rhodes, perhaps due in part to Julia's behavior. Allegedly, she had not seen the marriage as anything more than a legal document and had been conducting affairs with a number of other men. Augustus was the one who sent Julia divorce papers on behalf of Tiberius, banishing her to the tiny island of Penta. Apparently, the emperor was seriously considering executing his own daughter for the disgrace that she had brought onto him. On Penta, Julia was deprived of luxuries and visitors, especially men, but she was joined by her mother, Augustus's ex-wife Scribonia. Eventually, she was allowed to move to Rhegium, given an allowance, and even given permission to walk about publicly while her father was alive. This treatment ended with the death of Augustus. Tiberius revoked those privileges, claiming that, since Augustus hadn't put them in his will, the former emperor must not have intended to have them to continue. Julia, deprived of any visitors or money, with 2 of her children also exiled in different places, died after only a few months, possibly of malnutrition. Augustus had explicitly forbidden her from being buried in his mausoleum in his will, and so the daughter of Rome's greatest emperor was buried in a forgotten grave. Out of all of Julia's children, Agrippina would play the most important role within the Julio-Claudian dynasty. She was the daughter of Marcus Vespasianus Agrippa and Julia the Elder, making her Augustus's direct granddaughter. When her brothers, Gaius and Lucius, died, her cousin Germanicus was named Tiberius's heir. Agrippina and Germanicus were married, and it seems to have been a happy one. She was a constant presence with her husband, even during the years that he was stationed on the German frontier. Her presence there was a formidable one, effectively managing the garrison when her husband was on campaign and ensuring the integrity of the border forts. When natural disasters struck the expeditionary force, Agrippina was there to manage the flood of incoming soldiers, ensuring that they were brought to safety in good order. Her children, with Germanicus, were a constant presence in the camp, the most famous being her youngest son, Gaius. The soldiers adored the child, especially when he began dressing in a child-sized military uniform, and affectionately called him Caligula, meaning little boots. Ancient authors state that Agrippina was a devoted, loving wife to Germanicus, while also having a reputation of being very arrogant. Accusations of arrogance, though, are pretty common from ancient authors when writing about women with power, so these ones must be taken with a grain of salt. Germanicus died in 19 AD on his tour of Rome's eastern provinces, leaving Agrippina a widow over their 6 children. Agrippina, savvily enough, began preparing for her son's succession to the imperial throne. Initially at least, it worked. Tiberius' own son died only a few years after Germanicus, and Agrippina had 3 male children who, as direct descendants of Augustus, were perfectly positioned as heirs. Unfortunately, politics happened. In 23 AD, Agrippina slowly began gathering political support. This, though, resulted in a political rift between her and the de facto power in Rome, Sejanus, the head of the Praetorian Guard. As time passed, the feud became more and more intense, with each side vying for the attention of the emperor and the support of the nobility. Tiberius, who personally despised politics and political games, retreated to the island of Capri in an effort to bury his head in the sand. This didn't help either side to de-escalate. Agrippina apparently refused to eat any meal that was prepared out of her eyesight because of the fear of being poisoned, and she at the same time, in a rather pointed political move, requested Tiberius's permission to marry. Essentially, she was declaring that since he was incapable of defending her, she needed to attach herself to another noble family to secure a future for herself and her children. She was denied in this effort. Sejanus then took this opportunity to pounce. He had full control over the operations of the city and began to arrest Agrippina supporters one by one. The charges could be anything, with general treason being a common one, and eventually that charge made its way to Agrippina herself, who was placed under house arrest outside of the city of Rome. The only bar to Sejanus's purge was Livia herself, but when Livia died in 29, Agrippina was left defenseless. Despite that, the Senate refused to do anything more drastic to her family without the personal authorization of the emperor. When Tiberius finally realized the cascading effect of this rivalry though, he took no pity towards either side. Sejanus was brutally executed, while Agrippina herself was exiled to Pandateria, the same tiny island as Julia. Her two eldest sons were also exiled on trumped-up charges, while Caligula himself was forced into hiding with his surviving grandmother. Her time on Pandateria was relatively short and brutal. She was regularly beaten for her fiery pride, apparently to the point that one of her eyes was torn out. Her eldest sons were encouraged to commit suicide before Agrippina herself was starved to death. Caligula was the last son of Agrippina and Germanicus who survived the purges, becoming emperor in 37 AD. Agrippina and her sons were finally given a proper burial when he became emperor, while Agrippina's three daughters followed their mother's footsteps and played active roles in their brothers' and uncles' reigns. Her daughter, Agrippina the Younger, especially, would go on to be one of the most influential figures of the Julio Claudian dynasty. As the daughter of Germanicus and Agrippina the Elder, Agrippina the Younger was Caligula's sister and the great-granddaughter of Augustus. Her most important role, however, was being the mother of Nero. She largely comes into the picture when she married Claudius after the execution of Messalina, Claudius's third wife. Agrippina, like Messalina before her, is largely known by her reputed scandals and domineering personality, which would ultimately be her downfall. In the early years of Caligula's reign, life for Agrippina was pretty good. She and her sisters Drusilla and Livia were honored in several ways, most notably appearing on coinage as the sisters of the emperor. The three of them were so honored that the streets were filled with rumors and suspicions of incest in the imperial domus. Unfortunately, this comfortable lifestyle would come to an end with the death of Drusilla. Agrippina, Livia, Drusilla's husband, and a cousin were even involved in a failed assassination plot against Caligula. The details surrounding this event are murky, but the sisters were accused of all sleeping with Lepidus and attempting to install him as a replacement to Caligula. In the end, the sisters were all banished to the Pontian Islands and Lepidus was executed. Luckily for Agrippina, she wouldn't be in exile for long. Caligula's assassination and the declaration of her uncle Claudius as the new emperor meant that Agrippina could now return to Rome. At this point, Claudius was already in his third marriage to Messalina until she apparently married a lover, without even divorcing the emperor. Messalina, after a particularly messy political process, was executed, after which Agrippina and Claudius were promptly matched together. This ran into major problems though. Marriage between uncle and niece was incestuous and thus illegal, since Claudius was Agrippina's uncle. These laws proved to be easily dismissible though, and the Senate voted to approve the scandalous union. Within a year of Messalina's death, they were married. As one part of this scheme, Nero was adopted into the imperial family as Claudius's primary heir. The new couple ruled together for 5 years. Ancient historians, who were heavily biased against Agrippina, claimed that she was the true power of the palace from the moment that she married the emperor. For instance, despite laws against women being in attendance, she was active in meetings of the Senate. She took the power of the emperor in several ways, personally signing imperial documents and claiming an incredible amount of power for herself. Statues to her and her patronage were erected across the empire. She was the first living woman to appear on imperial coinage alongside the reigning emperor, and one veteran colony was even named after her. Perhaps most importantly though, she took personal control over appointing the officers of the Praetorian Guard. Eventually, Claudius died in 54 at the age of 63. His health had never been exceptionally good, but a historian's delight in the implication that Agrippina may have poisoned him with a plate of bad mushrooms. It's not impossible, given that one of her primary goals seems to have been to concentrate power for her own son rather than Claudius's firstborn. Regardless of these rumors, she very much took control after the sudden death of Claudius. She locked the city down, ensuring that no one was allowed to enter or leave, while she conferred with the heads of the military and the Praetorian Guard. In the end, Nero was crowned emperor, with Agrippina acting as regent, overseeing imperial policy and matters of the state due to her son's young age and inexperience. Eventually, Agrippina followed Livia's trajectory of being the wife of a former emperor and mother of the current emperor, and thus received additional honors and titles. Despite this, her prominence soon waned as the 17-year-old Nero started to push the limits of her regency. The teenage, after all, was old enough at this point to know the kind of power that he had at his disposal, and he was ready to exercise this. Things finally came to a head between Agrippina and Nero over his affairs with Claudia Acte, a freed woman whose relationship with the emperor Agrippina did not approve of. She saw Claudia as beneath him, but the emperor insisted that he was in love. Agrippina eventually began to tacitly support Claudius's other sons as a potential replacement for her own son. Nero simply had him poisoned. In 56, Nero removed her from the court and sent her to the imperial residence, depriving her of her bodyguards and accumulated honors. Her power was still quite potent despite this, and most of the nobility of Rome deferred to her as the de facto administrator of the city. This was the final straw, and Nero now began to plot the murder of his own mother. Suetonius claims that Nero now sent people to harass Agrippina with lawsuits and jeers. He then tried to poison her 3 times, but Agrippina outsmarted him by taking an antidote beforehand. Nero then built a machine that would drop ceiling tiles on her while she slept, but she outsmarted him yet again, changing her bedroom when she caught wind of the plot. He then came up with another inventive idea, to send her on a journey on a self-sinking boat, but Agrippina was able to swim to shore. Finally, Nero simply ordered his personal servant to stab her to death, but to make it look like a suicide. Cassius Dio writes the following, quote, "When she saw them, she knew for what they had come, and leaping up from her bed, she tore open her clothing, exposing her abdomen, and she cried out, 'Strike here, Anicetus, strike here, for this bore Nero.'" I hope that this exploration of the women of the Julio Claudian dynasty has been an interesting journey behind the curtain of Roman history. There is much more to discuss when it comes to each of their stories and the way women operated in the world of antiquity, but for now, this is where we will end this video. A huge thanks to the patrons for funding the channel, and to the researchers, writers, and artists for making this video possible. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and check out these other related episodes. See you in the next one.